Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. It is I coming at you once again, your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg. And today is a bit of a retrospective. So it's been an entire year since The Acolyte came to an end. Can you believe it? A whole freaking year. And there is a massive article making the rounds, sparking fan debate, and I want to give you my 2 cents on it. And on this general topic, I want to talk about it in the context of a new video by Red Letter Media, the return of Mr. Plinkett, giving his 2 cents on the current state of Star Wars, but specifically in the context of The Acolyte. I do take issue with a lot of what he said in that video, notably that, if you're a prequel fan, you should love The Acolyte, the main argument being it's just as clunky and just as daring. I disagree with this point of view. It's this idea that because The Acolyte emulates so many elements of episodes 1 to 3, if you like one, you like the other. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the things that prequel fans value. I mean, sure, for original trilogy fans, if you watch Star Wars back in the day, the prequels are jarringly different in terms of tone, the use of CG, the feel of the universe, but within episodes 1 to 3, there are the same George Lucas character archetypes. The operatic myth, the rise and fall of Anakin, the unique political commentary. George Lucas might have been an oddball at times and had some wild ideas, but the prequel trilogy is still cohesive and still follows a structure that builds up to the original trilogy. As I say, The Acolytes may emulate some of those things, but it didn't scratch the same itches. The characters weren't as well written, the characters weren't as likable, and I guess that's why to many prequel fans, myself included, it didn't resonate. I'm not saying all of us, I'm just talking from my own personal experience. George Lucas's reliance on tried and tested legends, on the anthropological archetypes, mean that to this day, all of his movies, so not just 1 to 3 but 1 to 6, have aged into something rich. So even if you want to talk about risk, just because 2 works are bold and daring, it doesn't mean the outcomes are the same. Even if one is inspired by the other, you can't just copy something and expect it to be the same. There's a heart and a core to the prequel trilogy which I found The Acolyte lacked. There's also this idea going round that The Acolyte is going to be appreciated by Gen Alpha. In the same way Gen Z and Millennials have a newfound appreciation for the prequel trilogy, there's a theory that Star Wars fans in Gen Alpha are going to bring The Acolyte back to resurgence. But the difference is, even if they were hated at the time, the prequels were a spectacle. They generated a ton of profit in ticket sales, in action figures, millions and millions of people saw them worldwide, and I just don't think the same is true for The Acolyte. But who knows? Maybe there will be a newfound appreciation for it one day. It certainly does have its passionate fans, even if they're very niche. But the people doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to trying to renew the show are the actors themselves. With the exception of Carrie-Anne Moss, who doesn't seem too bothered about it, the likes of Rebecca Henderson, Manny Jacinto, Amanda Stenberg, and recently Daphne Keane are the ones making the most noise, demanding The Acolyte be renewed. Now, I've covered comments made by Manny Jacinto in the past, but in a recent interview he said, if there is a season 2, it has to be Leslye Headland again. Yeah, I don't know how fans are going to feel about that. I think the popular idea has been, if they're going to do more with Plagueis and Chimera, or even more with Venestra and May, the series needs fresh blood, and it should be someone else's creative take on these same characters. But if hypothetically there was another creative who came forward and said, I have great ideas if you want to bring The Acolytes back, I don't think Disney's willing to hear them out. They've put their foot down and said, The Acolyte was the final straw. We're moving away from Disney Plus shows. They've not made us a profit, but maybe someday they will make a movie about the Sith. So one more update before we dive into the main article. At Fan Expo Canada, Daphne Keane said she would love to return as Jackie. I don't know how they do that. She was killed. And as far as I know, there are no projects called The Ghosts of the Acolyte coming soon. But I get where she's coming from. She had a good time filming Star Wars, and just like the other actors, they want a second chance. The actors did the best they could, I think, with their characters. Jackie's fight scene against Chimera was pretty epic, and even Daphne herself said she drew inspiration from the fighting style of Ahsoka, the use of aggressive acrobatic Jarkai. So the actors are still out there saying they would love a chance to return. Probably not going to happen, and with this in mind, let's dive into the article by Forbes.com. This is written by a familiar name, Paul Tassi, who was a bit of a controversial figure during the airing of The Acolyte based on his weekly reviews. So here we go. Paul Tassi says this: The Acolyte was an experiment for Disney, a first attempt to take its live-action projects fully outside the Skywalkers in a meaningful way, flipping the timeline back 100 years to the High Republic. Disney already mined that period in print, but live action was the next step. It failed. Like the show or hate it, it failed. Despite ending with many loose ends and huge implications for the Star Wars universe, Disney cancelled it, and that was a year ago this week. Looking at just the math alone, it's hard to argue this wasn't inevitable. The Acolyte cost an absolute absurd $230 million, making it one of the most expensive per episode shows on TV. That A, was not very visible on screen, and that's certainly true. That's a big difference between The Acolyte and the prequel trilogy. Say what you will about Anakin, the dialogue, the romance subplot, it was visually spectacular. George Lucas did a phenomenal job. By comparison, for the budget it received, The Acolyte should have looked much better than it did. Then they say B, it was the lowest viewed Disney Plus Star Wars series at the time. And C, it was ridiculous for Disney to believe a show in a new era starring all new characters could put up any viewership that would justify that cost. And he says the same fate would have befallen Andor after the first season had it not secured a 2-season deal up front. Now that's a very interesting take, because I'm not too sure I agree with him in regards to The Acolyte. The budget was ridiculous, but I don't know if the low viewership has anything to do with the fact it was set in a new era or had new characters. Of course, there is an argument to be made about familiarity, but a lot of these articles miss two crucial elements that I think determine the success of a Disney Plus Star Wars show: timing and fandom climate. I've said this before, but after The Mandalorian Season 3, after Book of Boba Fett, after Kenobi, more and more Star Wars fans started giving up on the quality of Disney Plus Star Wars content, so they just didn't find it as worth it to pay the subscription fee and engage with the new content. I don't think The Acolyte failed because it was High Republic or intrinsically had new characters. It was a mixture of Star Wars fan fatigue, bad press, and PR before the show dropped. Think back to the endless articles and videos about things Leslye Headland said. For a plethora of reasons, the show was cursed from the word go, and it's got nothing to do with a show that was set before episode 1, nothing to do with new Jedi, new characters, a new time period. I would say the opposite is true had they got their timing right. I said the same thing about Skeleton Crew. Had The Acolyte released around 2020, when everyone was at home during the pandemic, had it come out at a time when people were just eating up any Star Wars content, had The Acolyte taken the spot of Book of Boba Fett around 2021-2022, there would have been the same controversies, of course, but I'm convinced viewership would not have struggled as much. I'm not saying it would have been any better. I'm not saying fans would have liked it, but from a strictly business perspective, it would have gotten a much stronger viewership. When the show came out last year, it was really near the tail end of when fans were super excited about new shows, so I don't see a scenario where The Acolyte did better in that same slot. It's why I keep saying this break, in between Andor Season 2 and The Mandalorian movie, is actually healthy for Star Wars. We need some time to miss it and anticipate. Instead of the push for quantity, a new show coming out every few months, it's going to do Star Wars good. And it's also why I said in yesterday's video, and go back and watch that if you haven't, Ahsoka Season 2 is going to benefit too, because it would have been something like a year and a half since our last live-action Star Wars show, and hopefully fans will be buzzing after The Mandalorian and Grogu. But my biggest worry is that Lucasfilm is going to take away the wrong message, and I think they've already started doing that. They saw The Acolyte flopped, they saw the fan backlash, and they might start thinking it's a bad idea generally to take risks. They might stop investing in new characters. They might just stick to the Skywalker saga and its legacy in perpetuity. I really hope not. They should 100% keep trying to make new characters, new stories, new time periods, but get the right creatives involved, the likes of Tony Gilroy. Andor may not have been a new time period per se, but 90% of the characters were. And look how much fans love Clea, Luthen, Bix. That's considered the best Star Wars show, and there are no Skywalkers. Paul Tassi goes on to say this: all this said, it sucks this happened, and everything that followed. The Acolyte was an okay show that ended pretty well, and in the middle you could glimpse some true greatness. And then he praises episode 5. Again, I'm not here to bash it and to say you're wrong, it was awful. It's all subjective. If it worked for you, great. So let's move on. The rest was just alright. I was never able to fully get on board with the Force Twins concept. I definitely agree with this, even as it would end up hinting as to how Anakin Skywalker was conceived. I've already broken this down. It steps on the toes of the idea of how Anakin came about, but I think there's a big misunderstanding about this. Plagueis didn't create Anakin. Anakin was the Force's response to Plagueis manipulating midichlorians. You could very much see the enormous waste of money, like a starfighter chase that did not need to exist in a show where its best moments were lightsaber fights in the woods, or two people talking in a cave. It's hard to imagine a second season would need to cost anywhere close to that. Well, if season 2 was going to focus on the Stranger and Plagueis, then it could have been an entirely different vibe, with a significantly reduced budget, but I guess we'll never know. Now I want to fast forward to the final 2 paragraphs, because this is probably the most honest statement I've ever seen written about the show. After The Acolyte, Disney seems paralyzed. And hands down, I honestly think that was the series that made them change everything about their perspective. The other day we had the news that they want to make things that are more catered to men. They've admitted they've driven off Gen Z men, more specifically away from Star Wars, away from Marvel. And The Acolyte was when a Disney executive literally came forward and said, "We're done with these shows." The failure of The Acolyte completely threw Lucasfilm and Disney off. And I wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes, there was some reshuffling. We've spoken about the couple of creatives who left, but also in terms of maybe silent cancellations. Maybe Dawn of the Jedi is no longer in the works. We know James Mangold is prioritizing other things. But like I said, maybe Kathleen Kennedy learned the wrong lesson. Maybe she thinks we don't want anything before episode 1, anything new. But in a few years' time, with hindsight, we might look back and say, The Acolyte was a literal turning point. What do you guys think? 1 year on from The Acolyte, share your thoughts down below.